Hey everybody, it's Tracy, and a question that I get a lot or seems to come up a lot is the intellectual property laws surrounding NFTs and digital assets. And the general rule, right, for just copyright, because we're dealing with the application of somewhat arcane and very old rules regarding intellectual property protection, and now we're applying it to this completely different medium, right? And usually you see it in the context of NFTs. And as a general postulate, an NFT by itself is not subject to copyright, but the underlying work can be, provided it meets the general criteria for copyright, such as being original and creative, right? So the smart contract, everything that relate in the underlying platform that delivers the NFT, none of that is necessarily protectable with a caveat, which I'll get to. But the underlying work that the NFT represents is, right? In theory, right? And there's so much, I don't know if you want to call it theft, but there is a great deal of theft in the context of NFTs because people don't take the time or want to bear the expense. And I get that to a certain extent, right? Just from a practical matter, like if you look at photographers like paparazzi, right? They don't copyright any of their works, even though they could, but it doesn't make any sense because it'll cost you some amount of money, $60, $70. It takes some amount of months. And by the time you get it back, that picture, especially if it's not of exceptional noteworthiness, is worthless, right? So people don't do it, okay? But in an NFT, which is really in the realm of a collectible, and you've seen the prices, obviously they've come down, it makes a lot of sense, but people don't take the step to do it, or they attempt to obtain a copyright on the actual NFT and like the code that generates that as opposed to the underlying art. And so it goes sideways and they don't get the copyright and then people just steal it, right? And then I think there's a bigger issue, which is probably another topic for another time, which deals with the actual enforcement of digital asset intellectual property rights, which very few people are actually pursuing, right? So NFTs in the form of digital asset are not protectable. Now you could take it a step further and say, all right, is a smart contract subject to copyright? And much like software, it is. It can be. Again, original and creative, and you have to remember that for software or code to be subject to copyright, it represents the expression of work, not the work itself, right? So if you look at it and you think of platforms like Manifold, where you can kind of create this code and you own the code that generates the NFT, it's probably not creative enough to maybe pass, but it's like a start. So if you conceptually go back and say, all right, this is how we're going to do it, and then also copyright the underlying work, it's the best way to protect yourself. And from a practical standpoint, right, outside of getting a copyright, which for some of these NFTs, it's very easy to get a copyright, and it's definitely worth the relatively small investment. You really have to think of the digital provenance, right? So in the traditional art sense, you have artwork that goes back many hundreds of years, and you go to Sotheby's or wherever, and you get a provenance. And that is just like this handwritten record of the transfer of ownership over time, right? And it's important to have that, but with blockchain, it's great and it's easy, right? Because you can kind of see it and it's immutable, right? It's definitely immutable. To control the smart contract and then have the underlying copyright, you're protecting that NFT on like a double level, and it's more marketable, right? From the sense that people know they're getting an original work as opposed to a knockoff work, because people aren't going out and actively taking steps to protect their artwork or video or sound, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of like the general overview of it. Definitely hit me up if you have questions. I get it all the time, and it's not really even a case-by-case basis. It's just sort of the same thing. But definitely if you have something that's unique, make the investment and do the copyright. It's decidedly worth it. And if you get with a good copyright attorney, you can sort of put variations under one copyright and bring down the costs a considerable amount and the paperwork a considerable amount. That's my take. If you have any questions, definitely hit me up, adam@adamtracy.io, and I will talk to you next time. Cheers.